Quick questions. First, as I listen to you, I realize that most of the programs are outside of the United States.
Right.
So the question that came to me is whether you do anything here or only overseas, internationally. And one thing that is also tied into that question is how do you, even outside, how do you select the projects that you engage in? Do the people solicit your help? Do they? I mean, some people come in, but if somebody wanted something to draw attention to something outside, what is the process? How do what would the person have to do?
Okay.
And the third question is, how do you train the people? I mean, how do you select the people you train? If somebody wants to be trained as a peacemaker, what is the process? How does the person, does it come to you or what?
Okay, in terms of whether we do things in this country, our mandate, our legislation says we should not do anything in this country. We are strictly international. Now, we do things in this country, but not on interfaith relationships. For instance, we work with the State Department to try to make the State Department more open to engaging with religious communities abroad. That's one of the things we've been energetically involved in. But that's all a domestic interest that relates to an international agenda. So everything has to be international for us. There are other organizations that do domestic interfaith work. In terms of people coming to us to initiate projects, most of the things we have initiated have been ones that we have initiated. And working with local partners, we've refined what we want to do and what we think is possible. But occasionally an organization will come to us and say, like I mentioned Michael Melchior and his work with imams and rabbis. He came to us with that. We didn't go to him. And we knew him because we'd worked closely with him over the years on the Alexandria process. But he came to us and he said, can you collaborate with us on this project? And we did. So sometimes it comes the other way. But it's definitely a mutual process. In terms of selecting people for training, we leave that largely to our local partners. They know the local institutions, they know the local leaders, the local dynamics. And we may give some suggestions of how to go about it, but largely they do that on their own. Yes?
How do you develop the rapport of the Institute when dealing with foreign countries or other countries like maybe Iraq, Iran, some of the more Islamic or even Jewish or Buddhist countries? Do they still see you as a United States arm, but they might be a little less receptive because the United States is the big bully and we know what's right, especially with religion? Do they receive that, or have they grown to receive you all as peers and people with a really genuine concern to promote peace?
Essentially important for us. Of course, it differs country to country. In Nigeria, we haven't had that problem, although the Christians are more responsive to us than the Muslims, even if we come with a Muslim staff member. In Pakistan, we've had particular difficulty. As I mentioned, my Muslim colleague is a Pakistani American who speaks fluent Urdu, goes back and forth to Pakistan all the time. The last time he was in Pakistan, he spent 80% of his time trying to convince people he wasn't CIA. They kept discounting everything he said, and he said, no, we know that behind everything you're really an agent of the intelligence. And it was really, it was difficult, but it was so painful for him as a Pakistani American to be told this. So Pakistan is a particularly sensitive case. In Iraq, we have an office in Iraq, and we've been working there for the last 10 years. So we have established relationships in other fields beyond religion. And there is some sensitivity about Americans, but for instance, when we did our first training program in Iraq, we brought it Palestinian as the trainer. So it's not Americans putting ourselves front and center. It's bringing people from other Muslim countries to, or like the training of these Sufis from Pakistan. We didn't bring them to this country to try to train them. We took them to Turkey. And it was the Turks who talked to them about Islam. So using partners from other Muslim countries helps a lot, but it's always an issue, at least in certain countries.
Thank you also for being with us. I have also a few questions. I'd love to dig a little deep. I have this actually the same two questions, but the question about a domestic presence for your programming was a big question. I'd love to dig a little deeper as to why you think that that decision was made not to do any programming in the U.S. and give, post 9/11 and given, the violence and demonization of the Muslim community, if you think that any such programs might be developed. The other question, just so I can get them out, was I wonder if you do any interface with the Office of the Ambassador of Interreligious Dialogue. And the last question I have, I thought it was really interesting that when you mentioned that underlying a lot of the religious, the seemingly religious conflict were actually, social, political, cultural issues that were sort of being disguised as religious conflicts. So I wonder if you could say more about that.
Okay. I don't know the history of our legislation and the process enough to know exactly why we had that restriction placed in our bylaws. Actually, it's a good question. I've never explored it as to what the legislative background of that is, but it was very explicitly stated there. Whether they thought that would be meddling with internal politics or religious affairs, that might have been it.
Or admitting that we actually have a problem.
Or admitting we have a problem. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I don't have a good answer to you on that. We do work with the ambassador. In fact, we're developing a program in a couple of weeks. International Religious Freedom Day is coming up on the 27th of October. And the ambassador and her staff came to us and said, could we co-sponsor an event that would look at international religious freedom. Religious freedom is a little bit of a narrow slice of what we're interested in, and so we said we wanted to expand the agenda for the conference, particularly looking at the events of the last few weeks and trying to think of a way forward how we can avoid the problems we've had recently of demonizing Islam, but also the violent reaction in other countries to this rogue video. So we probably could work more closely than we have, but it's largely because their mandate is pretty narrow, and they're quite careful that they don't. I mean, her mandate is not interfaith dialogue; it's religious freedom. So she has to be pretty narrowly tied to that. In fact, one of the things, I'm going to a meeting at State Department tomorrow, and one of the things we're trying to promote is the idea of an office within State Department that would have a much broader mandate than just religious freedom, that would look at religion broadly and would give permission for Foreign Service officers and staff of the State Department to engage with religious communities and to engage in religious peacemaking in a way that they haven't before.
Is the October 27th conference an open conference?
We'll be webcasting it. It'll be on the 26th. 27th is a Saturday, so
The 26th.
we may have to change the date because 26th is Eid, so we may make it earlier that week. We haven't settled on that yet, but it'll either be the 22nd or the 26th. In terms of other causes that might underlie what we so frequently call religious conflict, it happens in almost all the situation. I mean, you look at the situation in Israel-Palestine. People may think of it as a religious conflict, but it's a conflict over land. It's a conflict over political power. It's a conflict over who controls whose lives. And it just happens that one group is Jewish and the other group is both Christian and Muslim. But virtually any place in the world where something is called a religious conflict. There are religious elements to it, but there are non-religious factors that underlie it. But religion is used to mobilize people because religious institutions are in place and there are religious leaders. And but I mean, if there's one takeaway I guess I would give to you is whenever you read in the newspaper, there's a religious conflict in the world, try to see if there's something more to it than that, because there always is. Gives religion a bad name.
When you say women are being taught to be peacemakers, what percentage of the places that are involved in teaching women to become peacemakers have been most receptive, and where are they, and how do we get involved as a seminary if we were interested in becoming women trained to be peacemakers?
Columbia, as I mentioned, is particularly vibrant in terms of women peacemakers. There we have, of course, the language barrier, but they've been particularly responsive there, although men still dominate. Men dominate in all these places. There are none of these places where women are really the leaders, the out in front leaders on religious peacemaking. But for instance, in the Philippines, we work with a dynamic Muslim woman leader from Mindanao. She brings together all the Muslim imams and the men together, and they respect her and treat her not only as a peer but as a leader. And she just by dint of her own, Philippines is less a male chauvinist society than most countries in the world. Women are better educated. Women have positions of leadership. There have been a couple of women prime ministers, and she's in that mode. She's in that stream of women leaders. So it's an easier. I mean, it's partly her own dynamism that does it and her skill, but it's also that Philippines is a better place to work for women.
Was the institute involved at all with the Ashraf detention center situation in Iraq, between Iraq and Iran?
No.
Were you aware of it?
Not until it blew up.
Oh, okay. And a couple of years ago, a number of Burmese monks were slaughtered. I don't understand, but given the parameters you explained about that conflict. Do you remember that?
Right.
What was that? What was that situation?
Well, it was an uprising of monks. They were on the good side of things at that time, and they were demonstrating in the streets. They were going on fasts, and it was to push for some opening in Burmese society. They were unsuccessful. They were a little bit ahead of their time. But they were prescient in what came later, what came within the last 2 years. So they were pressing for openness and tolerance, and Burma wasn't quite ready at that time, but now they are ready and things are moving.
And so the government, do you think, was responsible for killing them, or who?
Oh yeah, no, the government did. Yeah.
Also, just to share,
Let me just say something about.
Oh, sorry.
About Burma. This was not a religion program, but I'm sure you've read about Aung San Suu Kyi, who has been in this country and was in Washington, was in New York. We hosted her for her first American presentation, and I sat 2 places from her at lunch, and she is a remarkable person. Now there's a woman who's making history in a major way. I don't think she doesn't portray herself as a religious leader. I'm not even sure she's a religious person. She's just a dynamic, wonderful woman, but it was exciting to be part of that. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that I met with a friend, Jerry White, who's a deputy in the State Department
Right.
now, under
He's working
Secretary
on this.
Clinton,
He's
and
working
he's
on
working, is
on
it
this
maybe with the
issue.
project? Yeah.
He's centrally involved.
So he's talking, he was saying that he's going to be working on a project about going to places where religious conflict is emerging. So he's a deputy in the State Department, so
Right.
somebody was asking that. Sure.
Did you have a question?
Thank you. I'm just interested in seeing, since we are being doing a lot of global focus as a religion, we're trying to reconcile. I'm just interested in knowing, since this is United States trying to be the leaders of making this peacemaker conquers, is there any other huge religions or leaders in the world, like for example, the Vatican involved in working in this to make this like more huge and more powerful, that could move on with more power? This is just one.
Yeah, the Vatican has been fairly forward-thinking on interfaith relations. They have a whole office on interfaith relations, people dedicated to. They have a Jewish-Christian dialogue. They have a Muslim-Christian dialogue that they promote and sponsor. I visited that office several years ago, but they take it very seriously. I mean, when the chips are down and there's a conflict between Christians and Muslims or Christians and Jews, they know what side they're on. But they still make an effort to reach out when things aren't quite so tense. But there are different countries that take this seriously. We've done some work with Norway, and Tony Blair, the former Prime Minister of Britain, has his own foundation on interfaith relationships. That's his passion. After he left office, that's what he set up, and that's what he works on. So there is international interest.
Is there a challenge? Is there a challenge for the Institute to not generalize different sects of different religions? Sometimes you might think extreme terrorism is from this sect of Islam only, and then maybe work with another sect thinking that there are people here who don't want freedom or peace. Is there ever a challenge where you generalize a whole sect, where there may be, like in the Monk situation, there were some who wanted good, wanted peace, even though some might not have wanted it.
Right.
And it's a tussle between, and you guys have to choose which side of the coin you're going to work with at a specific time.
No, it's really important, and just let me take the Buddhism example in both Sri Lanka and Burma. It's so easy to generalize about Buddhism being a religion of peace and pacifism and forgiveness and tolerance, and then all of a sudden you're struck with these monks who are on a tirade against the other groups. But it would be equally a mistake to generalize from those monks and say, oh, well, all Buddhism is a religion of terror and warfare. And that's why we have to work with local partners, because they're the ones that can identify who the good guys are and to differentiate between the different subsects within the communities. Because there are in all these communities. I mean, they're in Christian communities too. I mean, then taking Nigeria, the Christian Association of Nigeria is the umbrella organization, kind of, it's the National Council of Churches for Nigeria. It was a very wise and tolerant leader of CAN, this Christian Association of Nigeria, in years past, who was always reaching out to Muslims, always trying to make peace. Now they have a leader, and when Boko Haram does what it does, he declares, well, Christians are going to take up arms. So, I mean, he's not helping the situation by just saying that the Christians are going to retaliate. That's what our position is going to be. We're going to retaliate with arms against Boko Haram. So, leadership changes and the whole organization takes on a different character.
These countries has primarily focused on humanitarian aid, and one of the things that I think we as people of faith recognize that type of, that model of missionary humanitarian aid charity alleviates some problems, but ultimately doesn't lead to peace. I think also we understand that the absence of violence doesn't necessarily mean peace, without there also being justice.
Right.
And so, given that a lot of these conflicts are also politically motivated, I'm wondering if within your training or outside of your training, but if ultimately the individual communities begin to engage in work around policy initiatives or within their governments to actually institute change and justice for the long term.
It's addressing the justice issues. It's understanding, it's listening, it's trying to understand the other's point of view, but then addressing the issues that caused the conflict in the first place. So definitely that's part of the training, is looking at the issues behind the conflict and trying to look at policy issues as well, which is one reason religious organizations tend to shy away from peacemaking, because it's then they're accused of getting involved in politics, and they don't want to be accused of that.
I have a question about when you're working overseas, do you sometimes get involved with other organizations such as Religions for Peace, or if there's a group in the United States that's been actively engaged in, say, Somalia, Presbyterian Women, for example, was very active in that situation. Do you work with them at all, or how do you negotiate that?
Yeah, we try to collaborate. Religions for Peace has a particular niche. I mean, they're organizing high-level interfaith councils. They tried to do this in Iraq early on, and now we're involved in, and there was a competing organization that we were involved with, but it died. And now we're involved with the council representatives establishing an interfaith council. But that's rare that we do that sort of work. We kind of leave it to Religions for Peace. We're a little bit more grassroots oriented, and but there are outstanding organizations that are doing good work that we try to collaborate with, or even support financially if we can. Religions for Peace has a budget beyond what we can help them with. I mean, they do very well at fundraising, but some of the other efforts are more modest, and we can help with. That's part of our grant program. We're very open to supporting religion projects.
What is the single most important part of changing someone's mind?
To listen.
To make a peacemaker.
To listen.
To listen. To listen to them.
To listen to them. To listen to the other. Just sympathetic listening. And to be a good listener is not easy. I mean, you get your own agenda in there right away, and you get your back up, and you want to get your point of view across. But to be a genuine listener and to give the other party a full chance to express their views, and hopefully the person reciprocates and gives you a chance to. I mean, one of the geniuses of the pastor and imam is this process they use of what is good about asking Muslims what is good about Christians, what is bad about Christians. And I've watched them use this process in different places. And you'll have a Muslim say, he or she will listen to what the Christian is saying is good about Muslims and about Islam. Then I'll say, I've never heard a Christian say anything good about Islam. I can't believe it. These people are saying something good about Islam. This is amazing. And all of a sudden, there's an openness that wasn't there before.